Taskbar Hero has a very misleading beginning. You play, and it feels like progress is simply not happening. I thought it was just pure grinding, until I started testing a few different things and realized you could speed up everything. A lot. After making plenty of mistakes and trying setups that didn't work, I ended up finding a much more efficient way to progress in the game. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that from the very start. I'm Mary, and let's get right into the video. I know the first thing you want to do when entering TBH is rush to the next area as soon as it unlocks, because it feels like a new map is synonymous with progress. But I learned this the hard way. Every time I advanced without finishing what the previous map had to offer, I felt my character getting weaker, not stronger. The game penalizes you when the level gap between you and the enemies gets too wide, dropping the experience you earn per fight. So rushing mindlessly becomes a silent trap that stalls your progress without you even realizing it. What I noticed is that TBH is quite linear in this regard. It expects you to take advantage of the free priest, unlock the third hero slot, and only then consider moving to the next stage. If you skip this step thinking you're saving time, you're actually doing the opposite. An incomplete team spends far more resources taking down each boss than a properly built team set up right from the start. I personally wasted hours trying to force my way through with just 2 heroes, and when I finally took the time to build the right team, the same map that was once a nightmare became a breeze. Another thing I want you to pay attention to: banging your head against the same boss repeatedly isn't the solution. It's a sign that you need to go back and farm a bit more before moving forward. Whenever I hit a difficulty wall, the answer was never to push through mindlessly. It was to back off, run a short session farming gold, gear, and levels, and only then return to the fight that previously seemed impossible. This completely changes the game's dynamic. A progression wall isn't an obstacle, it's a warning. So before advancing to the next map, I always ask myself 3 things. Does my team have the essential heroes unlocked? Is my build specialized around a single strategy rather than spread thin? And have I recycled the items my current team doesn't need using the cube system? When those 3 boxes are checked, moving to the next map stops being a risk and becomes a natural upgrade. This shift in mindset from advancing quickly to advancing at the right time was honestly what helped me progress faster in TBH than any single tip I had tried before. When I started, my intuition was the same as almost everyone else's. Grab everything that dealt damage and assume that would carry me through the game. But I realized that in the first few minutes and hours, every point put into gold generation was far more transformative than an extra point in direct damage. Damage helps you kill an enemy slightly faster, but gold helps you buy everything faster, including the damage you thought you needed to prioritize. What I did was change the logic. Instead of thinking, how much do I kill per second, I started thinking, how many upgrades can I buy per minute? That's when you see that gold acts as a multiplier for all your choices, because every extra coin turns into an upgrade that turns into more damage, more health, and faster clear speed. When you focus on income early on, you literally buy the rest of your character's growth instead of relying solely on fixed stat increments. In practice, I followed a very simple rule. If there was an option that increased gold generation, I took it before anything purely offensive, unless I was stuck on a specific boss. This allowed me to reach better gear and skill upgrades much earlier than when I tried to force damage from level 1. And the funniest part is that in the end, I finished with higher total damage than when I messed around with cooldowns and critical stats right away, simply because gold allowed me to buy all of that a few layers down the line. So, if you want to speed up your progression in TBH, I suggest treating gold as your #1 priority in the early stages of the game. Only after your economic foundation is solid should you start aiming for damage, attack speed, and endgame stats. It's counterintuitive, but it's precisely this shift that makes the game open up and stop stalling. You stop depending on every individual stat point and start relying on a system that generates resources for you to buy whatever you need. One of the biggest traps I fell into was building a team made entirely of characters that seemed to do high damage on paper, completely ignoring survival and support. The outcome was always the same. I melted normal enemies quickly, but died at the first somewhat tankier boss, and all my progress went down the drain. It was only when I understood that the game rewards team composition and not just who has the highest DPS number that my progression really took off. What I started looking for was a team with defined roles, at least one tank to hold enemies and protect the group, one or two focused on consistent damage, and a support providing healing, shields, or crucial buffs. This might seem obvious, but in the rush to grab any hero that looks strong, many players end up with 3 damage dealers and nobody to keep the team alive, which the game heavily punishes. When I set up a team with this basic structure, I noticed I could farm for much longer without returning to a checkpoint, and that alone accelerated my progression. On top of that, having a tank and support gives you room to run riskier but far more efficient damage builds because you know you have a safety net. Instead of sticking to basic attack and pray you don't die tactics, you can invest in abilities that take longer to activate or leave you vulnerable for a few seconds, knowing someone on the team has your back when things get tight. This synergy between roles makes the group's total damage output higher than if you had focused purely on offense, because you spend more time alive and consequently more time dealing damage. So if you want to progress quickly in TBH, stop picking heroes based purely on flashy damage numbers and start viewing the team as a unit. Who holds the line, who heals or buffs, and who delivers the actual damage. When these 3 elements are in place, the game feels completely smooth, and that's when you start clearing bosses that previously felt impossible, not because your damage magically spiked, but because your team is finally working as a cohesive system. The cube in TBH is one of those mechanics that, if used thoughtlessly, can literally stall your progression for hours. When I unlocked it, my first reaction was to recycle everything in sight, thinking any extra item would turn into a miracle upgrade. But I realized early on that every resource counts, and using the cube at the wrong time or for the wrong function burns materials that could directly strengthen your team instead. What I started doing was prioritizing, in the early stages, the cube functions that provided immediate and guaranteed returns, such as converting items I clearly wouldn't use into basic resources for gear or skill upgrades. I avoided trying to refine average items hoping for a perfect drop, because that consumes an absurd amount of materials, and in the early game, the cost isn't worth it. The secret was treating the cube as an optimization tool, not a gambling machine. Another thing that completely transformed my progress was holding off on advanced cube features like re-rolling rare attributes or extracting specific stats until I had a solid foundation of gear and gold. Early on, any item that gave me even a small main stat boost was good enough, and spending precious resources trying to perfect a green or blue item was just a waste. Once I finally reached higher tier gear, the cube became essential for fine-tuning details, but before that, it was just a resource sink. If you want to progress quickly in TBH, approach the cube as a strategic tool rather than something to use every 5 minutes. Focus on functions that give guaranteed, low-cost returns early on. Save complex and expensive options for when your gear reaches a tier worth micro-optimizing, and you'll feel like every scrapped item is contributing to actual progress rather than going to waste. One of my biggest regrets from my first few hours is treating all upgrades as if they were equal, without realizing that some of them benefit your entire account, not just the character you're currently playing. I used to be obsessed with boosting damage and health for a specific run, neglecting permanent upgrades that seemed minor at the time, but are actually what carry you long term. When I finally understood the difference between temporary and permanent upgrades, my progression completely leveled up. What I started prioritizing were upgrades that increase overall gold generation, experience gained, hero slots, and anything that unlocks new account-wide mechanics. This type of upgrade might not seem very impactful initially, but it multiplies across every new character you make and every time you die and reset. It's literally an investment you make once and collect dividends on forever, unlike stats that only serve a single run and disappear with it. Another rule I still follow: whenever I have to choose between a massive upgrade for the current character and a modest but permanent one, I go for the permanent one, unless I'm hard stuck on a boss. Over time, this stack of account upgrades creates such a strong foundation that your next characters start out far stronger than your previous one ended. This creates a positive snowball effect where each run is easier and faster than the last, which is how you truly progress in TBH. If you want to speed up your progression, stop treating every upgrade like it has the same value and start separating temporary benefits from permanent ones in your mind. Invest heavily in upgrades that stay with your account forever, even if it means advancing a bit slower in the short term, because that's the difference between staying stuck for hours and watching the game consistently open up with every new attempt. It took me a while to realize that the best map to farm isn't the hardest one, but the one where your team can clear quickly without dragging through fights. Recent progression guides for the game emphasize the importance of efficient farming and choices that accelerate progress rather than forcing content beyond your current pace. Once I started thinking about rewards per minute instead of difficulty for pride's sake, my progress became much more steady. For me, the ideal map is one where enemies die consistently without turning every fight into a mini marathon. If you enter a new area and realize it takes too long to clear, drains too many resources, or leaves you near death constantly, that map isn't your optimal farm spot yet. It feels like you're advancing because you entered a harder area, but in practice, you're earning less per minute than you would by clearing a lower tier area much faster. How I identify the sweet spot is simple. If the map puts me in a state of flow, it's likely the best map for me right now. I jump in, check if the team clears efficiently, ensure enemies aren't stalling my rhythm, and see if the run yields good returns without feeling like a slog. If it's too slow, I take a step back, because good farming in TBH isn't about looking impressive, it's about getting results without wasting time. Another important point is that efficiency doesn't depend solely on the map, but also on how well your build aligns with what you're trying to do. Game guides often note that being stuck isn't always a gear issue, it's frequently about how your skills are configured. So before insisting on pushing the hardest map, I prefer adjusting my team's setup and staying on the map where everything runs smoothly, because that's where the gold, stability, and actual momentum come from to hit the next area much stronger. One of the biggest traps I fell into in TBH was upgrading every piece of gear that came my way simply because it had a higher stat number than what I currently had equipped. I'd see damage numbers go up, get excited, spend all my resources, and 2 hours later, that item was obsolete because a better upgrade dropped. It was only when I began viewing the game as a marathon rather than a 100-meter sprint that I realized upgrading everything is literally throwing valuable materials away. What I started doing is simple. Before dumping resources into an item, I ask myself if this piece of gear has a real chance of serving me well for a while, or if it's just a temporary stepping stone. Very low-tier items, even if they look great early on, almost always get replaced quickly, so I avoid heavy investment beyond the bare minimum required to unlock the next content. This requires a bit of patience, but it saves an absurd amount of resources you will desperately need later on. Another game changer was focusing upgrades strictly on gear that fits my target endgame build, or at least features stats that remain useful long-term. If an item has stats that don't match what my team needs, it doesn't matter how high its damage or defense number is, it will become useless eventually. You end up with an inventory full of gear that looks strong on paper, but doesn't actually help you progress because it doesn't align with your plan. So if you want to speed up your progression in TBH, treat every resource as something precious. Invest only in gear that is genuinely worth it, that will carry you far, and that fits the direction you want to take your team. This mindset shift might not feel impactful right away, but over time, you'll notice you have far more resources to invest in the right endems, which makes all the difference between getting stuck and progressing consistently. The game is designed to run in the background, and it's precisely while you're away that AFK progression can carry you far more than you might think. What I learned through experience is that what you do with your team right before closing the game determines whether you'll return to solid gains or a feeling of wasted time. What I do now is always prepare the team with survival and efficiency in mind, not just damage. If I know I'll be away for hours, I don't leave an overly aggressive build that dies easily. I opt for a setup that can reliably clear the current map without stalling or dying repeatedly. That's because during AFK, every death interrupts your farm and reduces your total resource yield. The goal is keeping the team running steadily without performance drops. Additionally, I set up AFK sessions in areas where I know my team is fully comfortable, never on maps where I'm already struggling during active play. If a map forces you to micromanage, it isn't suited for AFK, and leaving your team there will only hurt your farm rate. The ideal choice is a map where you kill quickly, enemies don't knock you down, and the team maintains a steady pace on its own. That's what generates real passive returns. So before closing the game, I always ask myself, if my team runs unattended for hours, will it yield solid results or die and stall out? If the answer is the latter, I tweak the team setup or step back a map. This simple shift, treating AFK as a strategic setup rather than just leaving the game running, is what allowed me to return from long breaks with significantly more progress than when I only focused on active play. After trying various ways to play TBH, I realized that what truly makes a difference isn't a single isolated tip, but a consistent daily routine you follow every day. I used to jump into the game aimlessly, do a few random things and log off, resulting in slow progress and the feeling of spinning my wheels. It was only when I established a fixed sequence of actions, which I follow religiously every time I log in, that my progression truly skyrocketed. The first thing I do is collect all accumulated rewards, because leaving resources sitting around is literally wasting progression time. Immediately after, I use those resources to upgrade my current team's gear and skills, prioritizing whatever gives the most immediate return. Only then do I head to the cube, but with a clear head. I recycle only what truly doesn't fit my team and save the rest for when I have a more solid foundation. Order matters here because you want to enter farming at peak power. With the team strengthened and resources properly allocated, I spend whatever makes sense before going out to farm. There's no point in hoarding currency or materials if you aren't converting them into strength. That's when I push through a few maps, testing how far I can go without dying excessively. Once I hit the point where my clear speed is fast and efficient, I stop there and leave the game farming. This sweet spot map shifts as you progress, so testing regularly is key. But the rule is simple. It's better to farm fast and consistently than to die repeatedly on a higher tier map. As simple as this routine sounds, it was the single biggest driver of my progress in TBH. Collect rewards, upgrade gear, use the cube strategically, spend accumulated resources, advance through maps, and farm in the optimal spot. Repeating this daily with discipline ensures you never waste time or resources, and that consistency is what converts playtime into real, visible progress.